A toddler goes missing in Greece in 1991. Years of searching, hundreds of reported sightings, and an alleged confession of a digger driver. But where is Ben Needham?
Welcome to Vanished Voices UK, your new favourite spot for curious missing persons cases, true crime stories, and in-depth investigations.
The mystery of the little boy Ben Needham. A tragic accident or an organised kidnapping? On the 24th of July 1991, 21-month-old Ben Needham vanished from a farmhouse on the Greek island of Kos. Over 30 years on, despite high-profile searches and thousands of tips, his fate is still officially unresolved. This is what we know, and what we still don't. Before we get into what happened, it helps to know who Ben Needham was and the family around him that spent decades searching for answers. Ben James Needham was born on October the 29th, 1989. He was 21 months old when he disappeared from the Greek island of Kos. Ben's mother is Kerry Needham. Kerry was a teenager when Ben was born. She was 17 and she had met Ben's father Simon Ward when she was about 15. The relationship ended around the time that Ben was born. Ben's maternal grandparents, Eddie and Christine Needham, are central to the story. Eddie, a builder by trade, and Christine moved from South Yorkshire to live on Kos in 1990 after falling in love with the island. They took Ben and Kerry out to Kos in April 1991, and the family lived between a caravan in an area called Paradisi and the farmhouse Eddie was renovating. The Needhams were a close-knit family. Also working with the family at the time were Eddie's sons, Stephen and Danny, who helped on the renovation. On the day Ben disappeared, his mother Kerry was working at a local hotel and Ben was being looked after by his grandparents and other family members at the farmhouse. Witness accounts and family recollections say that Ben was running in and out of the farmhouse and playing on the terrace near the door shortly before he vanished. He was said to be playing with water, pouring it over his head, and playing with a stick. Adults were nearby and could see the terrace through the open door. Physically, Ben was a fair-haired toddler. His blonde hair and photographs of him were widely circulated. Because no confirmed trace of him was found, police and family used age progression images repeatedly over the years to try and locate him. These E-fit images were produced in 1992, 2000, 2003, 2007, and again in 2016 to show how he might look as he grew older. Kerry has been the public face of the family's campaign to find Ben. Over the years, she has made repeated appeals on Greek and British television, spoken to police and politicians, worked with volunteers and private investigators, and helped run the campaign pages and community groups dedicated to finding him. She later wrote about the experience in a memoir and has kept the case in the public eye for decades. The Needhams originally come from South Yorkshire. Eddie is reported as being from Chapeltown near Sheffield, and Christine from Thorpe Hesley outside Rotherham. Before moving to Greece, they had lived for a time around Chapel St Leonard's near Skegness. Kerry joined them in Kos in April 1991 with Ben, having previously lived in Sheffield. Next, we'll lay out the timeline of the day Ben disappeared and some of the initial searches that followed. On the 24th of July 1991, the day Ben disappeared, the family were staying at the farmhouse in the village of Heracles on Kos that Eddie Needham was renovating. Ben had been at the farmhouse while his mother Kerry was working at a nearby hotel. It was around mid-afternoon when his grandparents realised that Ben was missing, Christine realising that Ben had gone silent. Witness accounts and family recollections placed the time that Ben was last seen at approximately 2:30 p.m. He had been coming in and out of the farmhouse and playing on the terrace near the open door. The family and an associate of the Needhams first searched locally, thinking he might have wandered off or that Ben's teenage uncle Stephen had taken him out on a ride on his moped. Later reports state that Stephen had been the last person to see Ben before leaving the area on his moped. Reports describe the family carrying out an immediate search of the farmhouse surroundings, up and down the track lane beside the farmhouse, the field by the house, and the nearby orange grove. But when the family's own search did not find Ben, they notified local police. The Hellenic police mounted a search of the immediate area in the days that followed, with the Hellenic Army and Fire Brigade also involved in searches on and around Kos. But those investigations fall into the next section. The events around Ben Needham's disappearance have been investigated by Greek authorities, by UK forces who later reopened the case, and by specialist forensic teams. In this section we'll look at the main investigative phases, the methods used, the discoveries reported, and what police have officially said, including what they have not been able to prove. After Ben was reported missing on the 24th of July 1991, local Hellenic police led the initial inquiries on Kos. The Hellenic police, later assisted by the Hellenic Army and Fire Brigade at the island level, carried out searches of the farmhouse and surrounding countryside in the days that followed, but reported that they could not find Ben or any immediate evidence explaining his disappearance. Early in that process, members of the Needham family were extensively questioned by Greek police and were treated for a period as persons of interest, something the family and later commentators have said slowed wider alerts at ports and airports on and from Kos during the critical early hours. That procedural history is important because it influenced which lines of inquiry could be pursued immediately after Ben vanished. In the 1990s and 2000s, the case stayed open but unsolved. Hundreds of reported sightings were logged, many in Greece, but also internationally, and periodic appeals and age progression images were issued by police and the family to try and identify any credible matches. None of the major early sightings produced verified evidence that Ben had left the island alive. One of the most high-profile sighting leads came in December 1995 when private investigator Stratos Bakurtzis reported finding a fair-haired boy living in a Romani camp near Thessaloniki. Bakurtzis told Greek television that the child had said he was given to the gypsies because his parents did not want him. That report prompted local police in Veria to take the child into custody while they checked his identity. The sighting became high profile for three reasons. First, it matched the family's early fear that Ben might have been taken and trafficked, a raw and widely shared worry at the time. Second, the image of a blonde child living in a largely dark-haired community made the story visually striking and easy for international media to amplify. And third, the report fed into a wider emotional narrative across Europe about so-called blonde angel cases, episodes where an unusually fair child in a Roma community triggered intense public and police reaction. Importantly, Greek police ultimately concluded that the boy was not Ben. Veria's chief of police said that the child's birth certificate appeared authentic and that his biological father was serving a prison sentence and had left him in the care of a Romani couple. Investigators therefore treated the 1995 finding as a thoroughly investigated but negative lead, not as evidence linking Ben to the Romani family. In investigative terms, this episode shows two things: how specific dramatic leads can attract disproportionate attention, raising hopes and public pressure, and how those leads can also expose investigators to the risk of rushing to judgment or unintentionally fueling prejudice. The Romani camp sighting was properly pursued by police, produced documentary checks, and was dismissed when the evidence did not match. It therefore stands as an important example of a plausible sounding lead that thorough police work later discounted. From around 2012, the case took a new direction when South Yorkshire Police opened what the media and the force referred to as a fresh line of inquiry, often called Operation Ben, centred on the possibility of an accident at or near the farmhouse and the removal of material shortly after the day he went missing. The 2012 deployment involved specialists such as geophysical surveys, forensic archaeologists, and human remains detection dogs. These teams were used to examine areas of rubble and ground adjacent to the farmhouse. That work produced no human remains, but it formalised a working hypothesis that heavy machinery had been used on the day and that material might have been moved. A pivotal development came in 2016. South Yorkshire Police reported that they had received a witness account that the digger operator who worked near the farmhouse in 1991, a man later named in reporting as Konstantinos Barkas, who subsequently died, had told someone that he thought he had run over a child and then hidden the body in building waste. That new claim by a witness prompted a second larger excavation on Kos in September to October 2016. Over several weeks, officers removed and examined more than 800 tons of soil and rubble from 2 sites linked to the digger driver line of inquiry. Items recovered were sent to the UK for forensic analysis. No human remains were recovered during that operation, but investigators reported that they had recovered objects that the family believed might have belonged to Ben, most prominently a yellow dinky toy car and a fragment of a sandal, as well as pieces of fabric that were believed may have belonged to Ben. Detective Inspector John Cousins, who led the UK team on Kos, publicly stated that on the balance of the evidence uncovered during those excavations, he believed Ben had died in an accident near the farmhouse on the 24th of July 91. He said, "It is my professional belief that Ben Needham died as a result of an accident near the farmhouse in Heracles, where he was last seen playing." Scientific analysis followed. In July 2017, South Yorkshire Police announced that soil and material from inside the recovered toy car and a fragment of the sandal showed a chemical profile consistent with human blood decomposition, a finding reported by Professor Lorna Dawson, head of UK Soil Forensics Group, who explained that the soil chemistry suggested humans had bled in contact with those items. The police called the result intelligence that strengthened the accidental death theory, though they also emphasised it was not the same as a conclusive identification. Crucially, later DNA testing reported in 2018 showed that the blood on the toy car did not match Ben Needham's DNA. Police described the 2017 soil and chemical work as valuable intelligence, but not definitive proof of Ben's identity or of the full circumstances of what happened. Throughout the modern inquiries, South Yorkshire Police worked with the Greek authorities. Excavations on Greek soil required the landowner's permission and cooperation from Hellenic police and magistrates. The transitional nature of the case and legal and practical limits on excavation and evidence recovery decades after the event have shaped what investigators could and could not achieve. To summarise the investigative position reached publicly by the lead UK officers, they say their strongest line of inquiry, supported by witness accounts and forensic indicators, is that Ben may have died on or near the farmhouse in an accidental incident in July 1991 and that material was later moved. However, police also make it clear that intelligence and chemical traces are not the same as direct physical identification. No remains have been confirmed as Ben's, the blood recovered from one item did not match his DNA, and the case remains officially unresolved. Family reaction to the excavations and forensic announcements has been mixed and emotional. Ben's mother Kerry publicly welcomed the attention, but also spoke of suspicion and anger at what she described as evidence of a cover-up, particularly because no body has been found, despite the scientific indications on the items recovered. Those statements have been widely reported and form part of the public record of how the family has engaged with the investigations. Ben's disappearance has been more than a police case, it has been a family's life. For more than 3 decades, Kerry, Eddie and Christina Needham and the wider family and friends who run the Help Find Ben campaign have repeatedly appealed for information, publicly responded to police developments and encouraged anyone with tips to come forward. Kerry Needham has been the public face of the campaign. She has given many interviews on British and Greek TV, taken part in anniversary appeals and posted regularly via the family-run Help Find Ben page. The family ask for practical help, phone calls, email tips, and have repeatedly urged anyone who knows anything about that day in July 1991 to speak to the police, even after many years. Over the years, Kerry's public remarks have tracked the emotional arc the family has been through, the hope, the dread, the anger, and the need for answers. Kerry has made a number of statements over the years that may give us some idea of what she has been dealing with. After the police told Kerry that the Digger inquiry may point to Ben's death, she said 25 years living and not knowing where your child is torment. At least we would know and it would be closure. Also, during these excavations, Kerry reflected her frustration by saying, "They know he's dead, but they just can't find him. Someone knows where he is. For God's sake, help me find him." In 2018, Kerry spoke on Loose Women about the police findings and why she finds it hard to accept that he is dead without finding his body. She stated, "We're still in limbo. In my mind, Ben is still a missing person. It's very difficult for us to accept that he has died." When South Yorkshire Police carried out excavations in 2016 and later announced chemical traces consistent with human blood decomposition on items recovered in 2017, the family welcomed the attention, but were also vocal about their pain and distrust at unanswered questions. Kerry described the 2017 finding as evidence of a massive cover-up because a body was not recovered, and the family said they still needed proof that would allow them to grieve properly. Ben's grandfather Eddie Needham has also spoken publicly from COS and during later visits to the UK. He thanked volunteers and investigators, but described the family's long trauma, saying, "We have spent 25 years of our lives in limbo. We don't know if we will ever recover from this terrible tragedy." The Needhams have also appealed on Greek television and in Greek media, aiming to reach people who might be reluctant to speak to UK outlets. Those Greek TV appeals have periodically generated new calls to police and fresh lines of inquiry. The family have acknowledged that some tips turn out to be dead ends, but they continue to appeal for anyone with information, however small, to get in touch. In the past few years, the family have publicly responded to several fresh leads, from a man in Denmark who asked for a DNA test in 2024 to a US-based tip the family say was emailed to their Help Find Ben page, which was investigated in 2025. Kerry has expressed gratitude that people come forward, but has also described the process as traumatic and frustrating when cross-border checks and legal steps make progress slow. Speaking on ITV about the email tip from the States, she said, "It's a really slow process, which is quite frustrating and painful for us." Across all appeals, the request is consistent. If you have credible information, contact South Yorkshire Police or the family's Help Find Ben page. The family emphasised that even long-held knowledge can be vital and that authorities will treat new, verifiable information seriously. The Help Find Ben page is run by the family and lists an email address for tips. The family also ask people to respect their privacy while they pursue leads. The Needham family's public appeals, from television interviews to social media posts and anniversary vigils, are not only calls for information. They keep the case in the public eye and remind viewers that behind every cold file, there are people who have lived with uncertainty for decades.
This is the email sent to Ben's Facebook page from an anonymous email address. At Kerry's request, we've removed any location details other than to say that this is in the United States. The sender says that he believes he saw Ben Needham between 1991 or 1992, close to the time that Ben went missing. He says he saw him at a church where he'd been brought by a man. He says that man was there to drop the toddler off with an elderly lady. The sender then goes on to say that the man told him Ben was meeting his grandmother for the very first time. That email was passed on to South Yorkshire Police and they began a process of contacting authorities in America. The emailer was found and interviewed, but that was 5 months ago and 8 months after the message was sent.
This person has now been spoken to at length. Investigations are still ongoing, but yes, it's really, really slow process, which is quite frustrating and painful for us to, to have to sit back and wait for all the red tape from country to country.
In every long, unresolved disappearance, a handful of theories rises to the top of public discussion. In Ben Needham's case, those theories fall into two groups: the lines of inquiry supported by investigators and a wide range of community or forum theories. I'll run through the best known ones, then weigh the facts that support or undermine each. The first theory looks at accidental death involving a digger, and this is the police's strongest current line. This is the line of inquiry that South Yorkshire Police have described as their strongest, that Ben was killed in an accident near the farmhouse on the 24th of July 91, and the material was later moved, possibly by an excavator operator working close to where Ben was playing. A witness-led tip in 2016 said a digger driver told someone that he thought he had run over a child and then hidden the body in building waste. That tip triggered the large 2016 excavation. In the 2016 dig, as we've already discussed, investigators recovered items that the family said could have belonged to Ben, and these findings were treated as potentially significant contextual evidence. The 2017 soil forensic analysis led by UK specialists reported a chemical profile indicative of human blood decomposition, a piece of intelligence investigators cited as strengthening the accidental death hypothesis. However, no human remains were recovered in the 2012 or 2016 excavations, despite over 800 tons of material being moved and examined. That absence is the most important empirical limit on claiming a conclusive finding. Subsequent DNA testing reported by police found that the blood detected on the toy did not match Ben Needham's DNA. That result means that the chemical soil signal is intelligence, not confirmation of identity. Put together, the digger line is the most evidence-based theory because it was driven by a credible tip, was followed up with targeted excavations, and produced both physical items and soil forensic data, but it is not proven. The lack of remains and the negative DNA match on the toy are decisive limitations. They prevent the police from asserting a closed conclusion or laying criminal charges. In short, it's a plausible and strong hypothesis, not a proven fact. The next theory looks at whether Ben may have been abducted and/or trafficked. This was the family's early fear and remains a widely held theory in public discussion, that Ben was abducted and taken off cause, possibly trafficked or passed to another family. In the immediate aftermath, there were delays and procedural issues critics say could have hindered rapid checks on departures from the island. Those procedural factors explain why abduction remained a plausible early theory. Hundreds of unconfirmed sightings were reported in Greece and less often overseas in the months and years after 1991, which created the impression that a child might have been seen elsewhere. There were repeated sighting leads that pointed to children who were believed could have been Ben living with other families. However, these potential leads were investigated, and after checks including DNA and documentary evidence were ruled out, and no verified sighting has established that Ben was taken off cause. Abduction can therefore not be ruled out on procedural grounds alone, The early investigation's limitations left space for that possibility, but the factual record, such as the many investigated sightings but none being substantiated and no corroborating physical evidence, weakens the abducted and trafficked narrative as the likeliest explanation today. Investigators shifted the focus over time because the digger tip produced more concrete, testable leads than the sighting reports did. Still, family and public concern about the possibility of abduction is understandable given how the case unfolded. The next theory looks at whether Ben may have been raised elsewhere, living with another family under a different identity. Over the years, a stream of people have contacted the family or police claiming to be Ben or proposing leads, from the man in Denmark who sought DNA tests in 2024 to anonymous emails claiming sightings in the US in 2024 to 25. These possibilities get discussed heavily online. A man in Denmark underwent DNA testing in 2024. Police and later coverage confirmed that the result did not match Ben. The police have repeatedly used DNA to rule out self-identified claims. In 2023, DNA tests ruled out a match between Ben and the body of a boy recovered from the River Danube, another example of an investigated lead that proved negative. These examples both show why the raised elsewhere theory persists. People find patterns, memories, or chance coincidences that seem to fit. False positives and misremembered childhood details are common after decades of public attention, which makes DNA confirmation essential and shows why so many hopeful leads end up being exhausted. The next theory looks at whether there may have been a cover-up or deliberate concealment by third parties. A more speculative set of theories says someone on COS, whether the digger driver, locals or others, deliberately concealed Ben's body or obstructed the early investigation. This idea partly springs from the family's sense that someone knows more than they have said. There is no public verified evidence that any individual deliberately covered up a body, beyond the witness tip that an operator had buried material in building waste. Police have explicitly investigated the digger tip, for example, and failed to find any significant evidence, and they have not brought any criminal charges based on concealment or homicide. On Reddit and other discussion boards, you'll find many permutations and combinations of the above, arguments for the digger theory, claims the family covered something up, suggestions of international trafficking, and debates over the significance of the toy and soil evidence. These discussions often fill gaps in public facts with inference and personal conviction. So which theory is most likely on the balance of the available evidence? Investigators currently judge the accident/digger hypothesis to be the strongest because it was led by a specific tip, pursued by targeted searches, and produced physical evidence and soil forensic intelligence. That said, the absence of remains and the negative DNA result on the toy are powerful counterweights. They prevent investigators from moving from belief to proof. Other theories, abduction, trafficking, being raised elsewhere, or the Romani family hypothesis, have each been investigated, and so far lack the corroborating evidence to supplant the digger line as the most evidence-based working theory. Forums and social media will continue to generate ideas, but confirmed facts and forensic checks are what move an investigation forward. After 30 plus years of inquiries, excavations, and thousands of public tips, there are a handful of central questions that still need answering. Did Ben die on COS on the 24th of July 1991, as the digger accident theory suggests? This is the working hypothesis South Yorkshire Police regard as their strongest, driven by the 2016 witness tip. Confirming this would explain the immediate cause of disappearance and narrow the investigation to exactly who was present and what happened. If an accident did occur, where are Ben's remains, and why were none found despite large excavations? More than 800 tons of soil and rubble were moved in 2016. No human remains were recovered. That gap is the biggest empirical obstacle to concluding the accidental death hypothesis. Understanding whether remains were genuinely absent, removed, destroyed or missed would explain why the case is unresolved. Why did early policing procedures unfold as they did, and did those delays materially cost crucial leads? As mentioned previously, the family were questioned intensely early on, and there were reported limitations on initial port-airport alerts. Critics argue those steps may have hindered rapid checks that could have caught an abductor leaving the island. Clarifying exactly what happened in the first hours and days helps assess whether the abduction hypothesis should remain strong. Why did forensic indicators not yield a DNA match to Ben, and could improved techniques change that? Soil forensic work in 2017 indicated chemical signatures consistent with blood decomposition on a sandal fragment and soil from inside a toy, yet later DNA testing reported the blood on the toy did not match Ben. That discrepancy leaves open whether the material relates to Ben at all, to a different person, or whether DNA was too degraded for a match. If Ben did not die on Kos, how and by whom was he taken off the island? Abduction and/or trafficking was a plausible early theory and remains part of public debate because of procedural delays and many uncorroborated sightings. If true, it would mean searches on Kos will not turn up remains, and the investigation must focus on international movement and illegal adoption trafficking networks active at the time. Checking the flight logs and port departures from the days and weeks after Ben disappeared may pinpoint a known offender who could have kidnapped him. Are there still local witnesses or records on Kos who haven't been interviewed or whose testimony could now be corroborated? Time, migration and death mean witnesses disappear or forget details, but occasionally a new witness or a re-examined record can change everything, which is precisely what happened when the digger tip surfaced years later. And why did that digger tip emerge so many years later, and is the source fully credible and corroborated? The timing and provenance of the witness who reported the digger driver tip are central to judging the excavation's significance. Understanding why the witness came forward in 2016 and whether independent corroboration exists affects how strongly that tip should shape investigative efforts. Are there other physical locations, such as dumps, quarries, coastal discharge points or construction sites, that have never been searched and should be? If material was moved away from the farmhouse, it may have been taken to other local dump sites or taken to landfill. The 2016 excavations could have missed the true disposal spot. Finding such a site could produce remains or corroborative evidence. Did any administrative or procedural failings meaningfully obstruct evidence gathering? Cross-jurisdictional cooperation, evidence preservation, and chain of custody are vital in cold cases. If records were lost or not shared fully at the time, understanding that helps decide what investigative, legal, or diplomatic steps are still possible. Could future forensic advances provide conclusive evidence from material already recovered? Investigators have said that some traces are too small or degraded for current DNA extraction, yet forensic science improves continually. The items recovered in 2016 and 17, even if they didn't yield matches then, might be resolvable later. These are just some of the critical questions that shape what investigators still need to know. If you've watched this far, you know that this case is painfully unresolved. If you have any credible information, however small or however long ago it happened, please act. Even a single detail can change an investigation. If you are in the UK, you can call 101 and reference Operation Ben so that the call is routed correctly. If you are outside the UK, Contact your local police station and tell them you have information for South Yorkshire Police's Operation Ben. They can liaise with the UK authorities. South Yorkshire Police have also provided a dedicated Operation Ben email address, opben.needham@southyorks.pnn.police.uk. You can also call Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111 or the Missing People charity on 116 000. If you're unsure whether your memory or piece of information is important, share it anyway. Investigators will decide its value, but they can't act on information they never receive. If you do decide to come forward, you may change everything. Ben Needham vanished from Cos on the 24th of July 1991, and the family have carried that absence every day since. Imagine the small acts that mark a parent's life, the birthdays, the Christmases, the ordinary mornings, and the hollow where answers should be. Kerry, Eddie, Christine, and many other family members and loved ones still live with that not knowing. The searches, the digs, the tests have not given them the certainty they need to grieve or to heal. Ben was only a baby, and he deserves to be brought home to his family and at the very least laid to rest respectfully. Let's keep his name in the public eye and keep asking questions so that one day his family can live in peace. As always, thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, every missing person deserves to be found. Like, comment and subscribe to see more new and cold missing persons cases from the UK.